First class? To Africa? Traveling alone? Sounds fishy. That's what the airport officer said, before dragging a black woman out of priority lane, ripping open her humanitarian supplies, and slamming her against the glass wall. No threats, no crime, just Celeste Harmon, calm, composed, and handcuffed. What he didn't know, the woman he just humiliated was married to Darius R. Kincaid, CEO of the very airline operating that terminal. And when he showed up, every badge in that room started trembling. If your wife was publicly humiliated for flying while black, how would you respond? Because sometimes justice doesn't wear a uniform. It arrives wearing a suit and saying just 2 words: uncuff her. Morning at Rose Pine Junction Airport was steeped in the cold glow of fluorescent lights and the rhythmic hum of overhead announcements. International flights bustled with movement, but at security checkpoint C3, the air turned dense because of one prejudiced glance and one woman who refused to shrink beneath it. Celeste Harmon, 39, wore a simple charcoal blazer and carried a document bag filled with legal papers and credentials tied to her humanitarian trip to Eritrea. She was no stranger to airport security protocols, but today felt different. The eyes turned toward her weren't just curious. They carried an invisible layer of suspicion, one that stacked onto her skin tone and the quiet poise she carried. She handed her first-class ticket to the attendant at the priority lane. But before the handoff could finish, a sharp voice cut in, cold and clipped. "Hold on. I'll handle her." Officer Colton R. Maddox stepped forward, one of the agents assigned to international oversight. He didn't look at her ticket. He didn't ask for a reason. His eyes stopped at her natural hair, her brown leather flats, then flicked to the U.S. passport in her hand. "Where are you coming from? What's the purpose of your trip to Eritrea?" Celeste's tone remained calm. "I'm an international attorney. This is a confirmation letter from the State Department. I'm traveling to Eritrea to attend a UN-backed medical aid initiative." Maddox raised an eyebrow, glancing at the other officer nearby, as if silently inviting to question the legitimacy of her claim. A lawyer? First class? Traveling alone? Celeste didn't respond. She'd heard these questions before, hundreds of times, but each time came with a different edge, colder, more cutting. She placed her international health worker credential beside the ticket and met Maddox's gaze. "If you require additional screening, I'll cooperate. But I'd like to know, what in my paperwork triggered this need to detain me?" He didn't answer. Instead, he muttered to his colleague and signaled for her to move into the secondary screening lane. As she stepped away, he let out a comment loud enough for nearby travelers to hear. "Funny, someone like you flying first class to Eritrea for charity." Celeste paused, not from anger, but because she knew today this moment wasn't just another security screening. It was a battle she was now required to fight, with dignity, with restraint, and with the wordless defiance of a black woman long used to being misread by the systems meant to serve her. Celeste Harmon entered the secondary screening lane, her gaze steady and composed, a shield she'd been perfecting since she was 16, when she was first asked to open her backpack at the local library because she looked suspicious. Over the years, that shield had grown not because she accepted injustice, but because she knew losing her composure only earned her another label. Few in that terminal knew that the black woman in the gray blazer wasn't just any first-class passenger. She was one of the United Nations invited legal advisors to Eritrea, a country still healing from civil war, tasked with assisting in legal reform and child protection measures. Humility wasn't something Celeste had to learn. It ran in her blood. From her mother, a night shift nurse for 3 decades in Montgomery, and her father, a quiet man who fixed engines until his hands trembled too much to hold a wrench. She never flaunted her husband's name, and she had no intention of doing so today. But had anyone in Rose Pine Junction known the truth about the man en route to retrieve her from this quiet humiliation, they might have thought twice before mocking her. Darius R. Kincaid, current CEO of Novajet Airways, began his career in the very place he now owned, the baggage basement. At 19, he pushed carts, polished the shoes of first-class passengers, and was told countless times, "This entrance isn't for you," because his uniform bore oil stains and his skin didn't match the red carpet. He didn't retaliate. He remembered, and each night after his shift, he studied business administration at a community college. 20 years later, he bought the airline that once rejected his second job application for lack of upscale experience. Celeste didn't fall in love with him for that story. She loved how he carried it, like a scar, never hidden, never paraded. They met at a sustainable development conference in Geneva, where Darius was a silent benefactor, and Celeste, a keynote speaker who refused to use PowerPoint because truth doesn't need effects. When they married, they made one promise. If the system ever humiliated one of them, the other wouldn't just stand up for love, but for the thousands who had no one to stand with them. And this morning at Rose Pine Junction, when Celeste was pulled from the priority lane and Maddox's sneer followed her down the corridor, that promise woke up. Back in the international priority lane, travelers continued moving. A white man in a navy suit passed through the scanner. No questions. A blonde woman with a designer suitcase smiled at the agent, passport scanned, waved through. No hesitation. No scrutiny. Everything flowed like a smooth jazz set designed for the elite. Celeste Harmon stepped forward, first-class ticket in hand. Passport already open, she approached the marked line with respectful but unbowed eyes. The check-in agent hesitated. A young brunette named Caitlin glanced at Celeste from head to toe, as if trying to figure out whether she'd accidentally stepped into the wrong lane. After a brief pause, Caitlin whispered something into her earpiece. Seconds later, Officer Maddox reappeared, not as someone interjecting this time, but as someone requested for additional support. "I'll need to take a closer look at your bag and backpack," he said, pointing toward the secondary lane. "Just a routine check. Nothing to worry about." Celeste tilted her head slightly, not in anger, but with just enough edge to make her observer feel observed in return. "I just saw the last 5 passengers. All white, all with backpacks, and one didn't even have his zip shut. None of them were redirected. Is this routine random?" Maddox pressed his lips together, offering no reply. She was still guided toward the secondary lane, where the lights were harsher, the cameras closer, and suspicion more openly displayed. She placed her bag on the conveyor. Another agent, his name tag read Tyler, unzipped it and looked over the sealed pouches of medicine. Each one was clearly labeled with International Medical Organization stickers, signatures, and barcode verification. "What are these? How many boxes are you carrying?" "Children's fever reducers, broad-spectrum antibiotics, emergency water purifying tablets. I'm within the legal limit." All items were pre-registered with both the UN Mission Office and RJ Security 3 days ago. Tyler looked at Maddox, as if waiting for the green light. Maddox shrugged. "You know, a lot of people claim they're doing charity work. Turns out they're part of elaborate smuggling ops." Celeste didn't flinch. She knew the comment wasn't aimed at her bag. It was aimed at her skin, at her presence in a space people still believed wasn't meant for someone like her. She glanced back toward the primary lane. A German couple was being ushered into the luxury lounge. A Japanese businessman received a polite wave and nod. Meanwhile, she, carrying a U.S. passport, international credentials, a law degree, and an official invitation from a global humanitarian agency, was being held back as an uncertainty to be clarified. In airport language, this was called protocol, but to Celeste Harmon, this was theater. And the script had been written long ago, just waiting for the next person to cast. The scanner beeped long and loud as Maddox pressed the additional screening button. Celeste had passed through with no metal objects, but the screen still flashed red. A nearby officer stared at the monitor, then looked to Maddox, clearly waiting for direction. "We'll need further inspection," Maddox said, emotionless, like reading from a script. "Just part of the process, Ms. Harmon." But Celeste knew. Random screening rarely was. Not when she'd been the only black person in the priority lane for the past 10 minutes. "I understand protocol," she replied, "but I've completed biometric scans, passport check, and was pre-cleared by the organization. My international flight departs from gate 12 in 45 minutes. "Then you should cooperate instead of debating," Maddox snapped. "I'm not debating. I'm asking to be treated according to procedure. just like every other citizen here. And then something happened. A white woman, mid-50s, wrapped in a cashmere coat, standing behind Celeste, suddenly stepped forward. "This is a waste of time," she said, sharply. "If she's being held up, can I go through?" Celeste turned. The woman stared directly at her, her contempt thinly veiled. Maddox ignored the comment entirely, as if it had never been spoken. "I'll say it again, Ms. Harmon," he said flatly. "This lane is no longer available to priority passengers." Celeste lifted her chin, locking eyes with Maddox. "I don't need priority. I need transparency. Can you state clearly why I'm being held? Is there any alert tied to my bag? Any flag from international security?" Maddox clenched his jaw, then leaned in just close enough to keep his words between them. "I don't need a reason. I have authority. And when you step in here, that authority belongs to me." 1 second later, Celeste pulled out her phone, opened the voice recorder app, and spoke clearly into the microphone. "My name is Celeste Harmon. I am currently being detained without cause at Rose Pine Junction Airport by Officer Colton R. Maddox of RJ Security. I possess valid documentation, no risk alerts, and am being denied passage through security without legal justification." Maddox froze. A young female staffer at the next station turned her face away. Several passengers had begun to notice. "I'm not recording video," Celeste said calmly. "I'm making an audio recording, well within my legal rights in the state of Alabama." The silence that followed only emphasized each word. Then Maddox clenched his fist, his composure thinning. "You just made a big mistake," Celeste replied, her voice steady. "No, you did. And this time, I won't stay quiet." She looked straight up at the ceiling surveillance camera. The red light blinked. Everything had been captured. Before she could even lower her phone, Maddox stepped forward, yanked her bag from her hand, and slammed it onto the inspection table. Without gloves, he started tearing through it as if he were looking for a biological weapon, not fever reducers for children. "Oh, look at this. Water purifiers for a conflict zone? Or maybe unapproved pharmaceutical imports." He pulled out a Ziploc bag, held it up to the light, and shook it hard. Inside were activated charcoal tablets. Carefully tested supplies, Celeste had spent weeks preparing to deliver to villages in Eritrea without access to clean water. No government seal. No commercial label. Highly questionable, Ms. Harmon. Celeste kept her tone level. "I declared those to the U.S. Federal Flight Board. They're on a special clearance list for humanitarian aid workers. If you need verification, I have the email and the clearance codes. There's no need to." Maddox cut her off, tossing the bag back onto the table, spilling several tablets. "I don't need anything. I'm the one who decides who flies and who doesn't. And I'm not convinced you meet the standard for first class or any class." She took a long breath. The checkpoint had grown more crowded. Some passengers looked over, then quickly turned away, pretending not to see so they wouldn't have to take responsibility for what was happening. Maddox smirked, leaning closer. "Truth is, I've seen your type before, playing the virtue card, wrapping pills in a story about humanitarian work. But it's all a scam, right? Collecting international grants, blowing it all at 5-star hotels. Isn't that right, counselor?" Celeste didn't move, but her eyes had changed. This wasn't just resistance now. It was documentation, memorizing every word, every look, every abuse. Maddox nodded, as if he'd scored a victory. "You know I could put you on a no-fly list, right? One keystroke, one vague report, and poof, no Eritrea, no first class, no Novajet. I have nothing to hide." "Good, because there won't be anything left to hide after today. You should be thanking me. I'm just doing my job, keeping this country safe from good actors." Celeste took a deep breath. A fire was building just beneath her skin, but she held it down, not out of fear, but because she knew she didn't need to shout to be heard. She only needed the right person to be listening, and that person was on his way. Celeste remained still as Maddox began dumping her belongings into a tray, roughly and unnecessarily. He disorganized the medicine pouches, flung the water purification bottle aside, then nodded toward another security officer nearby. You're being asked to leave the screening area immediately. I haven't violated any regulation. I'm not carrying banned substances. I haven't made any threats. I've fully cooperated, and I'm being openly discriminated against. Her voice remained calm, but loud enough for others in the area to hear. A few passengers stopped. A young woman hesitated, then raised her phone to shoulder level and hit record. Maddox turned around, a flicker of unease in his eyes. But rather than back down, he struck harder. Ms. Harmon, you're disrupting a federal security screening. This constitutes disorderly conduct. Under RJ Regulation 223, I'm required to treat you as a non-compliant subject. I'm defending my rights. I'm not yelling. I'm not interfering. I haven't left the screening lane. What I see is an abuse of authority. He didn't let her finish. With a curt nod, two female security agents stepped forward. Maddox pulled out a pair of handcuffs. Celeste took a step back. I request the presence of a senior supervisor. Immediately, I have that right under the Federal Passenger Protection Statute. Request denied. On what grounds? He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned in and seized her wrist. Before she could react, cold metal clamped tightly around her skin with a sharp click. He spun her around, pinning her against a glass divider between two screening lanes. A younger officer nearby stammered, "Is this really necessary?" Maddox said nothing. He simply gritted his teeth and spoke loud enough for the entire checkpoint to hear. This passenger is being detained for disruptive behavior and refusal to comply with security protocol. Her belongings will be confiscated for further screening. All other personnel continue with standard procedures. Celeste didn't resist. She lifted her chin and looked straight into the overhead surveillance camera, like she was sending a silent message, not to Maddox, not to the watching passengers, but to someone on their way, the one she had already called. She said nothing as they led her away, but in her hand, she still clutched her phone. Its lock screen glowed with the words, "Emergency call, Darius R. Kincaid connecting." The cuffs bit into her wrist. Maddox pushed her down the secondary hallway toward the temporary holding room, but just a few steps in, a loud ping sounded from the phone still in her hand. The screen lit up with a bright message, "Emergency call connected Darius R. Kincaid." She tilted her head slightly, her voice calm, chillingly so. "I already called my husband. He'll be here soon." "Oh, wonderful. Call whoever you want," Maddox said, smirking. "No one's going to save you from the report I'm filing in the federal system." He half laughed, clearly convinced he was still in control. What he didn't know was that in this system, Darius R. Kincaid wasn't just a worried husband. He was a primary shareholder of NovaJet Airways, the airline that held operational authority over the international terminal at Rose Pine Junction Airport. 12 minutes later, everything changed. The security doors slammed open. A tall black man in a charcoal gray suit strode into the terminal with two lawyers at his sides. He didn't flash a badge. He didn't give a name. His presence alone froze three staff members in place. Darius Kincaid didn't shout. He walked directly to the security checkpoint where Maddox had ordered Celeste detained. "Uncuff her." The words were short, but they rang out like a fire alarm. Maddox turned, stunned. "Who are you?" "I'm the one signing paychecks for every name tag standing in this room." One of the nearby guards took an instinctive step back. Maddox tried to hold steady, but his breathing was already betraying him. "I'm doing my job," he said. "She's under suspicion." Darius raised a hand. "I've already reviewed the security footage she activated. I also have the audio recording and GPS logs confirming her location. All of it has been forwarded to Rose Pine's executive board and RJ Security Command. You'd better hope the press office doesn't get it next." Maddox looked toward the others for backup, but no one moved. Darius turned to one of the attorneys behind him. "Coordinate with command. I'm taking my wife home." He stepped forward, used his own key to unlock the cuffs from Celeste's wrists. She didn't say a word. She simply stared Maddox down, as if etching the final moment before the very system he'd trusted began to collapse around him. Suddenly, the airport's PA system crackled to life. "Attention! All RJ security personnel are to remain in current positions. An executive-level emergency review is underway. Any interference will be formally recorded. Maddox went pale. Celeste gently squeezed her husband's hand. Thank you for getting here in time. Darius never took his eyes off Maddox. He insulted my wife on the very ground I helped build with my own two hands. He's about to relearn what power means from the other side of it. Less than 3 minutes after Darius had removed the cuffs from Celeste's wrists, a call echoed across Rose Pine Junction Security Center. A female voice came through the internal comm system, urgent but still composed. Regional executive en route to checkpoint C3. Suspend all administrative procedures and coercive actions related to passenger Celeste Harmon immediately. Maddox froze. A senior supervisor burst in from a side corridor, shirt barely tucked in. He didn't need an introduction. The moment he saw Darius, he walked straight to Maddox. Officer Maddox, I strongly advise you not to say another word. Step away from the passenger. Now! I was only following protocol. Silence. This is no longer an internal matter. You've overstepped your authority. Celeste stood beside her husband, her face no longer steeled in defense, just quietly relieved, not because she had feared anything, but because the truth had arrived right on time. Maddox muttered one last feeble defense. I didn't know who she was. And that's exactly the problem. The voice came from Sheridan Pike, one of the two attorneys accompanying Darius, and NovaJet's regional chief legal officer. She stepped forward and held out a printed document, an internal memo confirming Celeste Harmon's honorary legal representative status for NovaJet's international humanitarian missions. The document placed her under direct protection via an operational agreement with Rose Pine Junction Airport. We submitted this to your system last week. It is legally binding across the international terminal. Detaining her wasn't just a breach of passenger protection agreements. It constitutes racial discrimination on federally governed grounds. The supervisor turned to Maddox, his tone hardening. Do you understand who she is? She is the wife of Darius R. Kincaid, the operational partner overseeing all international flight routes through this terminal. And you just detained, searched, and humiliated the spouse of the man who controls the facility you work in. Maddox went pale. The arrogance from earlier had drained away, replaced with desperation. A young officer stepped up and whispered to the supervisor. The security cameras captured everything. A passenger live-streamed the last few minutes. It's already online. Celeste stepped forward, her voice firm, not furious. You didn't need to know who I was. Because I don't need a title to deserve respect. I only need to be human, and to be treated as one. Silence swept the terminal. Only the soft hum of the baggage scanner could be heard, as if reminding everyone that procedure may be routine, but justice should never be. A crisis meeting was called on the third floor of Rose Pine Junction's operations tower, attended by legal counsel, security leadership, and airport coordination directors. Darius Kincaid didn't take a seat. He stood with both hands resting on the glass edge of the conference table, his voice low, but commanding enough to quiet the entire room. I'm not here as a shareholder. I'm here as a husband. And I want to know who authorized an officer like Colton Maddox to treat a passenger's dignity like it was optional, to detain her without a shred of justification. Maddox sat at the end of the table, no longer defiant. His eyes stayed locked on the wood grain before him as the surveillance footage from checkpoint C3 played on the large screen behind. There was Celeste, calmly presenting her documents. Maddox's condescending tone, the aggressive search of her humanitarian supplies, the arrest. Every frame was a living indictment. This is what you call national security? Darius asked. A black woman, fully documented, carrying diplomatic clearance, invited by a global organization, cuffed in front of crowds simply for standing her ground. The airport's chief legal officer exhaled deeply and leaned back. We apologize, Mr. Kincaid. There were clear violations of both protocol and professional ethics. The supervisor turned to Maddox. Colton R. Maddox, as of this moment, you are suspended from duty pending an investigation for abuse of authority, indications of racial discrimination, and serious violations of federal conduct codes. Your security clearance is revoked immediately. Maddox tried to compose himself, but before he could respond, Celeste spoke first. I'm not asking for him to be arrested. I don't need anyone to carry the humiliation I had to endure. What I ask for is justice, not to defend myself, but to help the system learn how to look at itself. Every eye in the room turned to her. In that moment, Celeste wasn't just a victim. She was the voice of everyone who had ever been forced into silence, told to stay quiet or be labeled disruptive. I don't want to be treated differently just because I'm the CEO's wife. I only want to be treated like a citizen. Darius nodded slightly and placed a steady hand on her shoulder. And this time the system listened. 3 days later, a press conference was held in the main hall of Rose Pine Junction Airport under federal media supervision. Celeste Harmon sat in the front row beside her husband, Darius R. Kincaid, with 2 legal representatives from NovaJet. Before them were more than 50 journalists, many from national outlets, live streaming the event in real time. Celeste rose and approached the podium. No notes, no pre-written statement, only her voice, firm, direct, and dignified. I'm not here to recount what happened. You've all seen the video. What I want to do today is propose change, not for me, but for the person who comes after me. The one who may not have a CEO husband, a legal team, or social media on their side. The room went still. First, I proposed mandatory body cameras for all airport security staff, with data stored for a minimum of 90 days and access managed by an independent third party. Second, every security officer must complete anti-bias training, including modules on racial profiling, gender sensitivity, and culturally responsive de-escalation strategies. Third, all passenger complaint procedures must be transparent, issued with tracking numbers, clear deadlines for response, and internal resolution protocols that do not exceed 14 business days. She paused, her eyes sweeping the room. If we ask passengers to trust the system, then the system needs to earn that trust. Applause broke out, first from a journalist in the back, then slowly spread until the entire hall joined in. Darius stood, walked to the microphone next to his wife. As CEO of NovaJet Airways, I want to make this clear. If these reforms or a reasonable alternative are not enacted within 30 days, we will withdraw our international operations from Rose Pine Junction Airport, and we will notify all our partners of this decision. This is not retaliation. We simply refuse to bring our passengers into a place where dignity can be handcuffed because of skin color. When the press conference ended, national headlines read, Celeste Harmon, the woman who forced the system to confront its conscience. The story didn't close with a personal victory, but with a societal ripple. Because real change doesn't begin with those in power. It begins with someone brave enough to stand, even when they've been forced to kneel. 6 months after the incident at Rose Pine Junction, real and lasting change had taken root. Checkpoint C3, the very place where Celeste Harmon had once been publicly humiliated, was now equipped with 360-degree wide-angle cameras that recorded continuously and stored footage for 3 months. Every security officer now wore a GPS-enabled body cam, and their name tags were printed boldly on both the front and back of their uniforms, ensuring that no one was nameless behind authority ever again. Above the passenger reception desk, a new sign had been installed. We protect your dignity, not just your safety. And then, a familiar face reappeared in the customer service area. Colton R. Maddox, no longer in tactical uniform, no longer bearing the slogan Risk Control. Instead, his badge read, Community Relations Division Bias Awareness Trainer. He hadn't been fired, but he had been made to confront not just public scrutiny, but himself. Over the past 6 months, Maddox completed 4 mandatory training programs on racial justice, implicit bias, and dignity restoration in law enforcement settings. Every week, he submitted a personal report, not to his supervisor, but to a civilian review board composed of representatives from local human rights organizations. Some say he's only performing to keep his job, but Celeste Harmon, the very woman he once targeted, thinks differently. When they crossed paths again at an aviation security reform forum, Celeste said just one thing: we don't need you to disappear. We need you to change so that others in the system will know that change is possible. Maddox looked at her for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. No defense, No excuses. Just a man learning how to cross back over a line he once used to harm others. Celeste Harmon's story was never made into a film. It didn't win awards. It didn't need a viral declaration. But it is now studied in at least 7 security academies and 3 law schools as a real-world case study on listening, accountability, and reform. Because sometimes the bravest act isn't rising after you've been knocked down. It's making the very system that knocked you down. Sit, listen, and relearn how to treat human beings. Today, when you pass through security at Rose Pine Junction, you're not just walking through a metal detector. You're crossing an invisible threshold where one woman was once dismissed, but became the reason an entire system had to bow its head. And from that moment on, learn how to lift it again, with conscience